delighted to have you be with me and for me to have a chance to be with you and talk about leadership, which is not something that in the time that I've been talking related to the creativity conference that I've ever taken the risk of speaking about. Usually as creatives, we work alone, or when we're working together, we're in projects and we're working in these interrelated areas. I have this, you have that. We collaborate in the ways that we do. But I really have been thinking a lot about a conversation that took place some years ago and how that conversation has affected me as a creative and also as a leader. I'm a conductor. I'm an orchestral conductor and a mindfulness teacher. The mindfulness has been affecting me a lot as a conductor, as a musician. I can't tell you how much. It's been a remarkable shift for me. But there was a conversation that happened with a musician friend of mine. His name is Paul, who was for a long time a member of the London Symphony Orchestra. And we were having this discussion one day, and I always kind of ask the same question. That leads me to the share the screen moment. So let's go there. There we should go, I think. And the thing I want to focus on was what I asked Paul and his quite surprising answer. So I asked Paul, because I'm always doing this with people, that kind of is a pretty good portrait of me talking to musicians. I'm going to ask them over and over again, what happens when you work with other great musicians? I'm going to ask that question repeatedly, and I do throughout my life, and I let people tell me things, and they often cut to the chase of something that is the particular thing, that I then can learn and maybe apply in my own life. So the question I asked was, Paul, member of the London Symphony Orchestra, and he was the leader within that of a section, what makes a great conductor? And Paul just immediately, you could just see the mind click. And he said, great question. There are two kinds. And the way of understanding those two kinds comes from this question, which is to ask that conductor, how do you see the orchestra? And the two ways that they will see the orchestra will define the nature of how they're a great conductor. So he said, I'm now talking about two approaches to being a great conductor. We have, those who aren't, but those who are, they have all the hands, they have the knowledge of the music, they know the score, they've got an interpretation in their head, but the way they see the orchestra becomes how they work with us. So he said, one of them sees the orchestra as a vehicle. And if it's a vehicle, it is like this kind of vehicle. It is able to do anything. And he said, we're a great virtuosic orchestra, and we will know early on when the conductor stops, or the way they conduct, actually the way they interact with us, even without words, if they see us as a vehicle. If they do, the way we know is I'll drive. And what they mean is that conductor is going to take over and be rather specific in the way they will talk to the orchestra. Trumpets, could you please play less there? Violas, I need an accent on that. Violins, it's too loud. Everybody please take the follow me for the ritardando, I'll drive. And what that implies is, from this kind of great conductor, top down, goal driven, and works very fast. So he said it'll be incredibly efficient. And our job as the London Symphony Orchestra is to get inside the head of that conductor and say, what are they imagining? And then for us to basically turn that into an outer reality, to be the vehicle that takes the interior sound, the interior way of seeing this music, and actualizing that outside. So from the I'll drive perspective, this approach to conducting as the conductor, I'll set a destination, i.e. I've got an interpretation. I'll choose the roads to get there, i.e. I will handle the rehearsals in terms of what takes place, what the sequencing is, how we'll work. And you will do these things, understand my goals, and you'll take me to my goal. And that's what we're going to do together. And together, then we'll achieve this desired result. What is that desired result? A great concert. So the benefits of this approach are that it's very efficient and there are clear roles. They know the conductor's role and the orchestra knows its role. The orchestra is actually respected as being a great vehicle and for their flexibility. In other words, it's not a beat you up. It's, I know you can do this. I know you're a Maserati and I've always wanted to drive one and here we go. But there's a limitation which I also want to bring which is the leader, whatever my interior world is for that interior sound is the outer edge of possibility. In other words, the vision that I've got, if it's a great vision, we'll go there together. But any limitation I haven't invited a way out of that. So the image I've got for the end of that week looks something like this. The conductor did summit. It was a huge mountain. It's a phenomenal feat. The orchestra did its work and they were a great vehicle to get you there. So Paul said to me, so that's one of the ways. And we have many orchestras, and he said I could name them, many conductors, I could name them, that work with the orchestra in this kind of way. London Symphony Orchestra as a vehicle. And he said, but then there's another kind of orchestra or orchestra conductor. He also has good hands, great approach, knows the score, is a total professional. And he sees us differently because he sees the orchestra as individual creative centers, 104 creative centers. And in that approach, when he stops, and I say he as the not gender-based, he or she stops, the conductor will invite something which is less specific. And so what's happening is that conductor is opening a gateway for a shift from top down into something else. And the thing that's going on is to release this creativity, which is sitting inside there. After all, these are phenomenal musicians. I can't even begin to express how great each individual creative musician is in an orchestra like that. But what's going on is rather than saying, I will tell you what to do, what the invitation is, why don't we learn from each other and find out what we're going to do? So this is creating space for volition. What's really going on is that you're opening up this possibility of you could actually help run this. And that means that we will make goals and agreements together, and that the interpretation, even though I may have a very clear interpretation, or this conductor, she may have a very clear interpretation, but the ultimate interpretation would be discovered, and it can only be discovered through this process. And Paul kept saying this, that we don't know what it's going to be until the concert is over under this kind of week. So it has a lot of instability that's built into that as we discover and change as the week is progressing. So what's going on in this kind of model is more like this. It's inviting contributions from everybody, and it's seeing everybody as a wonderful individual creative force. So the benefits of this would include that it's very fluid leadership, and it's high energy. The whole organization, of course, is going to be engaged. And there's a lot of horizontality in the structure rather than the top down. This is moving out into another approach. So this is a creative leader that is seeing, instead of the orchestra as vehicle, seeing the orchestra as creative center, and then trying to release a room full of creativity. The limitations that come with that, it'll be processed. It would mean it takes more time. It can be chaotic. So one of the things Paul said to me was, when this starts to happen, if the conductor doesn't know what they've done, we're in for a terrible week, because we have unleashed a room full of horses, 104 horses, but we've not found any way to corral them. And so now it's going to be, so he said, if, this is a very dangerous kind of week. And also that the conductor, if for this to work, will have to create emotional safety, because you're asking people to throw ideas out, and you can't do that and simultaneously be slamming the people throwing the ideas out. So if you're going to encourage risk, you've got to actually create a kind of culture immediately that is going to let even a not successful idea out of the room in a way that doesn't destroy this emotional safety. Finally, you have the unknown factor, which is how will the orchestra work in this very, very free environment. So this is what can happen, of course. It can be really, really chaotic. And on the other hand, another way to see that is that's just a room of energy that hasn't yet been organized in some kind of way. And so how we see this orchestra also relies on the skill set of the person who has released this chaos. So under this wheel drive approach, a conductor's job is a little bit modified. You're still interpreting, you're still working with the orchestra, you still have your interpretation, you still are cueing, you know everything about the score, but the work is a little bit different. And I thought maybe we might explore what kind of work would that be. One is emotional safety as a culture. One is an open environment. So you've got to create, under this scenario, possibilities for bumping around. And that means opening up space for the bumping to happen without blood on the floor. So next is inviting competition, contributions from across the room, which means that figuring out how that contribution can happen. For instance, it's different for a soloist. The clarinetist is an individual, but contributions from a section of 18 violins is a different kind of invitation. And then setting these evolving boundaries, because as I said, if you don't, the horses will run everywhere. You can't make the date of the concert. So this work starts, and I asked him, well, how is that done under these great conductors? And he said, they start with a very big corral. And I love that as an image. It's like, it isn't that there's no fence, it's that the horses don't know about the fence yet. So they're just busy, and you're releasing all this creativity, and people are finding out, I'm allowed, here I go. But as the week progresses, you are working to negotiate. Well, if you're going to do this, we're going to have to do that. If he's going to play at this volume, she's going to have to play at that volume. And then if she's going to do this sort of shape, all of us will have to drop below the bottom of her musical shape to create space that allows the full freedom of her dynamic to be heard. So you're negotiating agreements that are freeing up each of the horses to run inside this field and really actualize themselves, but without really getting constrained. So this negotiation of agreement implies that the conductor is respecting the room and maintaining that respect. This can't happen in an authoritarian perspective, but they also have to know you're running a show. So the other part of this naturally is that you have to guide and correct course. And the way that happens is to keep moving the fence. So what's taking place here is that as the week progresses, the broad corral begins to come in, and the agreements have been made, and we set some outer boundaries that still leave a lot of space, because again, we don't know what's going to happen until the concert's over. But we're gradually bringing the orchestra into, we're not going any further than this now in this particular area. So by moving this fence in, but not by closing it up and constraining it, now you're in a shoebox, nothing like that. There is still a field here. It's just that the conductor, she may be moving the fence gently as the week progresses. Then the role of the conductor is to work throughout the week to protect the creative process. In other words, part of the job here is to keep working at, and especially for the conductor, the problem is it's ever diminishing time. You've only got a certain amount of time, and 8 o'clock on Friday night, this has to open. I mean, it's there, show goes. So one has a tendency to want to move toward conductor A approach and get more authoritarian as the week goes on. But actually, protecting this process, something is shifting, which is not yet understood. The beginning of the week, I said, will be chaotic, potentially, or bumpy. But as the week progresses, what was inefficient moves to ultra efficiency, because the orchestra has begun to work inside this culture and they get better and better at listening and adjusting. It's a form of jazz, even if this is Brahms. And so what's taking place here is that the orchestra is been working into a culture that, well, now that I'm really attuned to what you're doing, I'm becoming part of the person who's moving the fence. I'm moving my fence. The chorale is gradually coming into closer and closer to an agreed view that it will perform on Friday night. Finally, so this is broad idea generation is being protected. Finally, sharing this glory. So I always think about the Tao, and it has this, you probably know this phrase, but it talks about the kind of leader, and it starts with the worst kind of leader, and it progressively comes to the leader who actually disappears. And then when the leader who's this amazing leader, they say, finally, all the people say, look, we did it ourselves. And that is what really we're talking about. But that is a very advanced view of leadership, because this skillful leadership involves skillful means. And so it's really requiring a kind of movement of leadership that's quite rare. So all this sounds great. We all say, well, I want then, give me conductor B. Remember Paul said both of these are great conductors. So what I wanted to finish with was kind of a caveat. Under the wheel drive model, the conditions have to be right. Since it introduces chaos, the leader is part of the success. If they don't have skillful means, if they're not able emotionally not to kill all the creative thing by yanking down when you get a suggestion, if your ego can't help that somebody else is going to handle, that somebody else has got an idea and you've invited into the room, you can't do this. The group has to be mature enough to be able to handle freedom, and to accept that chaos is not the goal, but a necessary step. You need time in this kind of model. This model can't work in a really short time because it starts with inefficiency. So time is part of the model itself. To get to ultra efficiency is a time-based as well as a cultural-based factor. Finally, the orchestra has to be good. You can't use the wheel drive model with people who can't drive. So they actually have to be able to do this if you're going to use this kind of approach to leadership. So I don't know much time. I've been, we're actually, I think, pretty close to my goal. I'm at 19 minutes in from the start. And I would welcome comments and your thoughts. I hope you'll go. Please do.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So two questions. Have you done both of these methods?
Yes.
And have you found yourself in the middle switching to another one?
You shift like this, but you have a basic approach. So there are points where you can't do this in the length of time that a professional orchestra does work. It's so tight that you can't just simply say, I'm going to throw this to the, and it doesn't work. It can't. So there are points where you are going to move in and be conductor A and drive this car for a second. It's like opera. You know, the singer is singing and you're accompanying, and now she needs to open or he needs to open for this place, and they drive the orchestra and you're accompanying. It's like accompanying a concerto. But in the other side, there are points where it's a tutti and the conductor's running that show. And the movement has completely shifted. It's a volitional change, but this is fluid leadership, which is sometimes with me and sometimes actually being invited to be with them.
I have to say also, this has been brilliant, John. It's just absolutely brilliant. I've never thought in this way. Another question I have is, do you find yourself going to, say, a different orchestra that you don't know, and you don't know how you're going to approach it? Do you end up gauging the drivers and saying, well, I don't know if they're going to be able to drive this piece?
You know, I think at the beginning, there's a lot of open space right in the front of your first rehearsal with an orchestra, and they actually figure you out in about, I don't know how limited the time is, but it's crazy fast. Like, it's just stupid fast. They know right away if you're good enough to be on in that place or if you don't belong. And so part of that is they do some work at the front. Then I think there's something else that happens is if you're hearing that you've got a great player. I'm thinking right now of a certain musician once that as soon as that instrument played, I went, oh my gosh, this is extraordinary. there's something that happens you can just do with a baton, which is to pull back and open the space. You've said you have the floor. Please go on. I will keep the strings with you. Do something. Sometimes you have to stop and actually invite it. I have done that. I'm remembering right now Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto and begging the first horn, please play it the way you want to play it. But she had never been asked. She'd always been told. So it took a while for her to really believe it. Finally, I said to her, you may never get this question again from conductors. Is this the way you want to play it? How do you want to play it? And years later, I saw the soloist for that concert in New York. And she said to me, you know, I listened to that. I never forget that moment because this player played it better than when I played it with Chicago. Not because it was a better player, but because there was freedom and real expression of this is how I want to do it. And she said, rather than them imitating me, I imitated her. When she did something, I changed to respond to what she had just done rather than the other way around, which I found fascinating. So it has, you know, it has a mix. I didn't want to make it where it's just, oh, pick conductor B. They're both great conductors. It's just, they do different things.
And thank you for answering my next question, which I'm going to leave, which was how do you coax that out of it? And you just answer that. That's out of a player that you know that's there. And how do you just answer that? Thank you so much.
I did have a moment, and I will say this, once in Siberia, doing a Shostakovich symphony. And in this particular symphony, there is a bassoon solo. And this was not long after the wall had come down. And they simply they couldn't do conductor B. They were used to a very authoritarian perspective. And I remember that particular bassoonist, I was just saying, please, for the Ninth Symphony, you have to tell the story. It's an individual story. And he would just say, Maestro, how do you want me to play it? So it was so frustrating, but the culture wasn't yet there. I'm sure today it would be, but, or maybe not right now today, but
Great. Thank you so much, John.
Thank
Wonderful.
you. Anyone else? I welcome anything. I know our time is incredibly short, of course.
Question in the chat. The first one would be somebody like von Karajan, and the second one somebody like Hans Zimmer or something like that.
That's like an interesting way to say it. I think of different conductors. You almost can tell right away. Go to YouTube, hit play, and you'll know, right? I think that sometimes I'm thinking of certain conductors where the way they conduct a great conductor like this. I'm looking at him right now. Wow, his father was a conductor too, and he was in Argentina. Do you think I'm going to say his Kleiber? And Kleiber is much more of a B conductor. If you saw Muti, he's more of an A, where he really is authoritarian, but he's a great conductor. Good grief, right? But he comes down with this very strong. But you watch this with watching Kleiber, the younger, not the older, but the younger, and you see something that it's absolutely astonishing. It makes you weep almost with the space that he creates. It's a Zen master.
Thank you.
Yeah. Of course, I wanted to create this conversation because I hoped you might apply it outside of orchestras. The whole thing,
this is amazing. This as you were talking, I'm going, because I have to lead a lot of recording sessions. Bands are a condensed orchestra into 4 or 5 crazy people, and you go through the same things preparing for a show, and there's egos and different things, and the leader could be very authoritarian or very, well, let's kind of jam on this. And so to me, it was absolutely brilliant because I can apply it on so many levels.
I hope you can. And I think this can also work organizationally. But again, I go back to the nature of the leader is part of, which is why Lao Tzu says what he says, because it requires someone who can do that thing. You might check that if you don't know that particular page, you can search, I'm sure, for look, we did it all ourselves or something like that with Lao Tzu. And it's a great lesson from the Tao.
I was just going to say, John, in my former field of lactation, I'm a clinical speaker, I'm an educator, I'm a teacher, and I'm more of a type B type of, leader in that I want to see what everybody has to bring to the table. Whereas other speakers in that field are very like, I'm going to tell you what to do, when to do it, and what you're going to know and how you're going to learn it, and what I say goes. And I'm all like, no. Mm-hmm. So, for me, your whole presentation is more like a metaphor just to kind of spread it out to so many different environments and fields and just groups and people. And it's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that makes me happy because I don't think there's much value, I must say, in just saying, oh, that's what a conductor does. Really, I'm not sure the point. But I think what Paul did for me was provide an easy way. And he then said to me, by the way, you are B, and I really appreciated that. But he said, what I really see with that is you're much interested in creating a field and creating a culture and creating conditions and then encouraging people to become a part of that. I don't say that about myself. I'm trying to say that Paul said to me, we remember both of those great conductors, but the weeks that are with conductor B type, we never forget. And we talk about them because we were there making it. So we feel the engagement ourselves as being a real part of being the cook in the kitchen. But we also appreciate that those conductors know how to corral us because we know certain, and he said, they're members of the orchestra, give them a few feet and they will run like a Mustang. And you really can have, and I've seen that, and it really is destructive. So that's why I wanted to put in the B caveat. It looks wonderful, but it does take some skill sets. Anyway,
I love,
really,
John, your
thank you.
one line, which is the leader is the outer edge of possibility. And so it requires a very knowledgeable leader in both things. And I think in the B side, even more so, because you're dealing with that. So I love this. It was absolutely fabulous.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming at the end of a long day. I know, but I really, really do appreciate it. I wondered if I would be, inviting my mom in or something like that. So thank you very kindly for including this in your day here.
Everything you'd said applies to cinema also, to film.
Really?
Directing actors. There are some people who say, I want Othello in this way, and this is my way of doing it. And there are people who say, what can I do with this bunch of people that,
John,
are talented?
It was also analogous to my work. In fact, I was a musician before I got into the Imagineering world, but I always thought about how I had to think about my place in a band and understanding, that I'm just one part of this greater whole. And I always carried that with me when I became a leader. I tried to, as much as I could, to help my team members understand their place in using the analogy of a band with what they were doing, and tried to, as much as I can, help them understand the larger context of what we were doing so that they could excel within that. So much of what you said today rang true to me. Thank you very much.
No, I'm just thrilled. Thank you so much for telling me this. It'll give me food for thought as well. This whole conversation, all I'm really doing is presenting somebody else's ideas, but I have to say, I think a lot about it, and I found there are times when I have to be conductor A, particularly if the orchestra is not that strong. I really have to fill in. It's not fair to them. And on the other side of it, I'll try to find little places where I can to try to be conductor B with where you can. And then you have to take the responsibility of things are as they are, and I have to do what needs to be done to make the date.